Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Just a few things to clear up before we I actually get to my presentation, please, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the speaker before me, well, let's start with the Honourable Member, Mr. Christopher Jones. Mr. Christopher Jones told this House that under the APNU, dialysis was free. Mr. Speaker, that was a lie. Am I allowed to say lie? I'm sorry. That was economical with the truth. Yeah, Mr. Speaker, it was not free. Dialysis was not free under APNU. What happened under the APNU, the only thing to happen was a $300,000 one-off payment was given to persons who required dialysis. The present position is, Mr. Speaker, under this government, $600,000 per year is given to each person who requires the assistance. 550 people benefit from that. There is a lab that is set up to do the tests and provide associated chemicals and medicine. They have also said, Your Honor, Mr. Speaker, that what they have done with dialysis is it was free, you walked in, you went anywhere. That was not true, Mr. Speaker. Dialysis requires machines. The machines require components. Chemicals and other components need to be done for every patient. That didn't exist before. Now, Mr. Speaker, that is there. The extended centers are at Linden, Region 3, Suddy hospitals. Dialysis centers are in Georgetown, on the East Bank, Region 2, Region 3, Region 6, Region 10. And all of the new hospitals are going to have dialysis in them. Mr. Speaker, the thing about this is this was published. The centers, the assistants, the places that people could go, the people who needed assistance, this was published in the newspapers. Mr. Speaker, we then get to a very bold statement from the Honourable Member, Mr. Jones, as it relates to free education at the university and about how much they love young people and how much they prefer education. Yet, Mr. Speaker, when it came to fees at the university, the coalition government, APNU-AFC, raised university fees by 35%. That is a fact. The University Council subsequently met, and 10% and more was what the administrative fees were raised by. Now, Mr. Speaker, we all know that at present, the position of this government is university education is free. Those who have loans and student loans before, it's going to be written off. But interestingly, Mr. Speaker, under the APNU-AFC government, you might be aware, or you might not be aware, the Honourable Member, Ms. Ferguson, you might not be aware that those who went to UG and took a loan, your government, and when you were a minister, published their names in the newspapers and said they can't travel. But you wouldn't know that because You got funding and a scholarship, apparently, to study overseas. So you wouldn't know about those who had to go to UG. You wouldn't know. You went. But didn't you have money to go and study a master's outside of Guyana? So you wouldn't know. So
for a course she never
Mr. Speaker, forgive me,
completed. For a course she just like Sharon. Bring the
but allow me to state that I support Budget 2025, so expertly presented to this House by the Honorable Senior Minister, Dr. Ashni Singh. Allow me to thank the Honorable Minister, his staff, and indeed all of the members of Cabinet and their staff for presenting a budget that is significant. Mr. Speaker, it is worthwhile to not only commend the budget, but to reflect on it. The significant progress we as a nation have achieved under this government, the PPPC government, over the past 4 years. We are now witnessing right before our eyes, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Member, Mr. Datadin, I stopped the clock. And I want to refer to Speaker Ramkaran decades ago. There are two words that are popping up quite often in the interruptions. One is cry of shame, and I just heard nonsensical, and the particular person who said nonsensical was also shouting thief many times. So please, we only have a few speakers to go, and let's see if we can continue with the efficiency that 𝐃𝐄𝐁𝐀𝐄𝐁, Edmund, the Honorable Member, and Director Finance concluded their presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we are now witnessing right before our eyes economic transformation that positions Guyana on an upward economic trajectory that we have never seen. Guyana stands out now as a beacon, not only in the Caribbean and CARICOM, but on the world stage, Mr. Speaker. The accomplishments that we have achieved, Mr. Speaker, were all promised in the 2020 PPP manifesto. They are not milestones, Mr. Speaker, more markers, more symbols of all that has been achieved and what keeping your promises look like. Tangible results, visionary leadership, sound governments, a deep commitment to the people of Guyana. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have to compare it with what went before. So, if we look at stable economic growth in this country, Mr. Speaker, Guyana has unprecedented economic growth and continuous over the last 4 years. Mr. Speaker, it is driven principally and in large part by our petroleum sector. Revenues are carefully managed and spent to improve our infrastructure, but it ensures that there is sustainability and development of the nation through the National Development Fund. In this regard, Mr. Speaker, under the leadership of this government, we've taken control of the petroleum sector to ensure its growth. We have passed new legislation. The most important one, perhaps, if I dare say, is the Local Content Act. The introduction of the Local Content Act, Mr. Speaker, was putting into law measures that protected our citizens. What existed before it? As usual, promises, perhaps feasibility studies, perhaps reports from the advisors to the petroleum advisors, such as Ms. Carol Joseph, who would have given grave and weighty advice as to how we should manage this petroleum sector, I imagine. But, Mr. Speaker, what happened? Nothing. There was a local content policy being shepherded around by the director of Petroleum at the time. We then heard, Mr. Speaker, that this local content policy that was in existence was being amended, and we would have local content policy number 2. Mr. Speaker, we never saw number 1. We don't know what it said. We don't know what was amended. Number 2 came along and was kept as a national secret. Again, it was not put out, it was not introduced to the population. We kept hearing about it, Mr. Speaker, while people suffered, while opportunities were lost. For example, Mr. Speaker, since the Local Content Act that was introduced by this government came into force, more than 1,100 companies have applied for and obtained local content certificates. Mr. Speaker, that means that there are 1,100 companies involved in the petroleum sector that are 51%, at least 51% owned by Guyanese people. In 2024 alone, Mr. Speaker, that accounted for revenues in excess of $620 million US. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's what keeping your promise looks like. That's what caring about the people of Guyana looks like. Don't say you're going to have a policy to benefit them and for which they would be able to develop their companies and earn revenue, and you don't actually do it. When it was done because there had to be a legal underpinning to allow the citizens of this country to benefit preferentially from their petroleum reserves. And that was done. Mr. Speaker, we talk about the PSA and the errors and the unfairness of it all. But what has happened since? Now, we know under this government, there is a revised PSA for future companies. There is a Petroleum Activities Act that sets the compass and the direction for the petroleum sector, not only today, but for years to come. The Natural Resource Fund, Mr. Speaker, another key component of this equation. The Natural Resource Fund that had been passed when the government had already fallen, and it was passed in a parliament, could not be understood, and it was shrouded in secrecy. No one can with certainty who could have calculated what amount of money could be taken out of that fund. No one could calculate with any certainty what the fund was supposed to do with investments. Not even Jordan could have done that. But, Mr. Speaker, what we now have is a natural resource fund that is simple. What could be taken is very clear. How much is taken is very clear. There is a number value, 500 million. Then what happens with the investment? That too is very clear. So anyone that wishes can find out what is happening. With that legislation came the obligation, Mr. Speaker, that the Honorable Minister had to lay in this Parliament how much money was received in royalties and from profit oil, so that everyone could know. It's gazetted, it's published, it's laid in the house, and if it's not done, there is the penalty of jail and a fine. Mr. Speaker, the education sector and healthcare in Guyana has grown by leaps and bounds. Remarkable achievements have been made in education insofar as it relates to the physical structures, the schools that have to be built, but also the teachers that need to teach in that schools. There is more. Again, under the previous administration of APNU, we heard promises. I am sure there were feasibility studies. I am certain there were reports. Perhaps all of that took up all of the available funds. Maybe that's what happened, and there was no money left to actually build the schools and train the teachers. Now, Mr. Speaker, it is important that we recognize some of the catchwords and phrases and what is being said by opposition, by members of the honorable members of the opposition about the budget. A favorite seems to be fiscal space. To say now there is fiscal space to do all manner of things. They say it is an oil economy and we are rich. Mr. Speaker, that is not entirely true. It is an oil economy, but we are not rich. We're getting there, and if we manage our finances prudently, we'll get there. Now, but under the budgets and under the regime of APNU, they said there was no fiscal space to do this, but they taxed everything. 400 new taxes. They raised taxes, 400 new taxes. 400 taxes were raised. I am sure you didn't know that if you had more than one dog, you had to get a license and pay for it. I am sure you didn't know that if you had a horse, you had to pay a license per foot. I don't know why it was per foot, but assuming all horses have 4 feet. But this was it. You sold newspapers on the corner. You needed a license.
Honorable member, I have the honorable member, Ms. Fowler Lawrence, on her feet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the present member on the floor has referred to the previous government raising some 400 taxes. I'm asking, Mr. Speaker, that the honorable member lay over in this house these 400 taxes that have been raised by the previous government.
Honorable member, you stood on a point of order.
Yes,
Now
Mr. Speaker.
I waited for you to say what that point of order is. Or
4 to
was.
1, Mr. Speaker.
You could put that in a question, but as I understand it, he is saying that if you put a tax on a dog, that's one tax. If you put it on a horse,
No, Mr.
But-
Speaker.
but you were explaining your 400 taxes.
Let him lay over in the house.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, and if I could explain it more. So what happened was, again, Matt's being the very, very strong point of the opposition. Mr. Speaker, they made amendments to the laws that took into account all of the licenses that existed. They took into account, even if you had a gate, you needed a license. So perhaps the honorable member will pay a little less. I heard she took back her gate. But, Mr. Speaker, you had all of these measures because all licensing was raised. So all of them were raised by a percentage. Mr. Speaker, when when the PPP came back into power, it was all reversed. All of it was reversed. More. No, more was reversed. We took away VAT on water, we took away VAT on electricity, we took away VAT on education. All of that was done. That's not included in the 400. So, Mr. Speaker, again, we're facing a startling thing that occurs in this House with regularity. The attempt to rewrite history. The honorable member before me said CSOs were not fired. Rewriting history. It's a fact. This is a fact. They were fired. Mr. Speaker, it's rather simple. Today they had a job, tomorrow they did. They were fired. And comes to this House and says they were not fired, or oh, they were somehow connected to a political party. They were fired. That was the truth. The attempt, the continuous attempt to rewrite and gloss over history is astonishing. We'll soon hear about the election.
What is astonishing is you have completed your time, including the interruptions. You need an extension.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask my honourable member be given 5 minutes more to conclude his presentation.
Thank you, Minister Teixeira. Honourable member, you may continue and conclude in 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Take the other very popular one that the opposition like to say they can't eat roads. They can't eat schools. So they need to understand how development works. I understand that they don't have the capacity to do so, perhaps, but it's simple. You see, what happens is this. The roads are built by people, human beings who go to work. Those people who go to work earn a salary. With that salary, they can take care of their family. They can put food on the table. Coming back to the whole issue of fiscal space, and among the things that the APNU AFC government did when they were saying about fiscal space, they fired they closed down the sugar industry and fired all the workers. They took all the CSOs, but they still spent about $150 million a year on food. They still spent that money, and they said they didn't have fiscal space. Mr. Speaker, the comparison of the side that will make promises that they will never deliver. Instead, they will do reports, they will do commissions of inquiries, they will do feasibility studies, they will do nothing actual. It's what in the old days, Mr. Speaker, we would refer to as a talk shop. That's what it was good for. But, Mr. Speaker, we have and we see the trajectory that the country is on now, the development, the roads that are built, the bridges under construction, the roads across the country, the schools, the hospitals, all of it, Mr. Speaker, is from prudent management. Mr. Speaker, now we look, and it's because of promises. The promises of 50,000 jobs has been delivered already. The promise of 50,000 house lots is at 39,000. More will be more. The promise of grants. Again, the APNU AFC come here and they say, and they want to promise that they love people and but they did away with the cash grants. The cash grants are back. Other cash grants are in place. We have, Mr. Speaker, promises of all sorts that are being made. But when APNU AFC was in government, not one single promise was kept. There is not one infrastructure project that was undertaken in this country during that 5 years that they can point to. So Mr. Speaker, we then have a very simple equation. There's one side that will have a talk shop and promise everything. There's another side that will deliver. Arguments are made, and continuous arguments are made about the gas to energy project, for example, saying they want a feasibility study for what will be done and how much it will be. Mr. Speaker, they fail to realize how commerce works, how industries are built. With a gas to energy project, energy that is much needed in the country will be provided. There will be, along with that, industrial and commercial applications for which energy will be cheaper. It will make us more competitive. It will build sectors. Mr. Speaker, when the questions are being asked, why do this? Why do that? And you should do this. We have to remember, they were there and they did nothing. Mr. Speaker, permit me with those few words to commend Budget 2025 to this House.